From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again and welcome to the show. We begin today with an observation, a kind of a fun observation. Protest rallies sure have changed a lot, especially when the rally is entirely coordinated by an issues management firm that was founded by the political advisor and right-hand guy to the President of the United States. And when the sponsors of the rally have the full, unequivocal support of the mayor, the president, the secretary of education. You probably saw this very big rally in the Loop Wednesday evening of 6,000 or 7,000 people. That's what they claim. It certainly was a lot of people, and nobody at the police department tried to lowball that number as they did earlier with another rally on March 27th. So the Charter Parents United were perfectly coordinated in matching t-shirts and caps. They had professional staging, a music DJ, a powerful sound system, and they had 53,000 postcards, which they delivered to Barbara Byrd Bennett's office. They walked through the traffic-cleared Loop during the rush hour, and they demanded that charter schools get the same funding as so-called traditional public schools. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Charter schools are public schools. That's what the crowd was chanting yesterday, and it's a fact. So do they get less money, or do they in fact get, or do they really get about the same amount of money? We're going to try to debate that today. And we're opening more charters when we are opening charters while we're closing neighborhood schools. And while we're on the topic, how about those hearing officers who went rogue a few evenings listening to parents begging for their schools to stay open? Didn't they know the time for debate was over? Well, we have three people here today who are very deeply involved in these issues. Antoinette Sea-Gerald is a charter parent from West Englewood, and she was at yesterday's rally, and was she ever? If you saw some video, you saw her. Wendy Katten is a parent too. She founded Raise Your Hand. Her kid, her son, right? Son? Mm-hmm. Her son goes to Burley on the north side. And Curtis Black is back. He's from News Tips. He's written often on CPS funding issues and the schools closing controversy, and Curtis is always glad to have you back on the show. Tony, that was one heck of a rally you had there yesterday, and I kid about the professional organization of it, but I mean, you had a large showing there. It
Absolutely,
was,
yes, yes.
As you observed from the stage.
Yes, yes.
So, okay, all right, lots of bands playing, lots of pretty pictures and all that. But what was the message? What were you trying to get us to understand?
The message that we were trying to get across to all of Chicagoland is that charter schools are public schools. That's first and foremost. And all we're asking is for the same funding. We're asking for equal funding because it's publicly funded. Every one of the schools that are in our chartered networks, every last one of them are considered a public school. And right now, currently, we're just not receiving the same funding. And unfortunately, what's happening is when you look at the traditional public schools, we're not saying remove anything from them. We're just asking for the same amount of funding that they receive. We're not asking to remove anything. We're saying, why aren't we getting the same?
Can you be specific? I mean, what funding do you not get that whatever we call the other schools, the traditional public schools, do get?
Well, you know, I'll say right now that the numbers have been skewed all over. I mean, some say it's 75% to 100%, some say 80%.
That's why I'm asking you, because I was online for a while last night trying to figure out that number, and I can't find it. So
okay, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know the exact number, and we can't put an exact number to it, and I guess I don't want to sit here and pretend as if I know an exact number. However, we do know that the funding is not equal. $1 equals 100 pennies. $1 equals 10 dimes. So if it is a penny I'm losing, or a dime I'm losing, or a nickel that I'm losing, I'm not getting the same funding. And right now, we are for certain that we're not getting the same or the equal funding that the traditional public schools are getting.
Well, you're getting more in some cases because of private investors. I think the real truth is nobody knows about the funding of any of our schools because we don't have transparency. And so there's money coming in all over the place. But charters don't have to release their contracts. There's a lack of transparency across the system, and I think there's different funding mechanisms going on, and I think we need more transparency. But you know, charters also got an increase last year of 3.4% across the board. So I don't know where we're at in terms of level. But if you factor in the private investments going to charters, which we're not getting clear info on, I think the notion of equitable funding becomes a bit unclear.
It's murky.
But if you think about the private funding that we receive, it's only because that's something that we have to do. You know, there is a gap between what we're receiving and what we should be receiving, and what I call that equitable amount. And so, unfortunately, we're not going out looking for private investors or private funders because we're getting our funding. If we get our funding, we wouldn't have to do that. I mean, unfortunately, you know, we're at a situation in which we appreciate the quality education that the charter schools are providing. We absolutely embrace that.
Right.
However, we also understand that we're not getting everything that the traditional schools are getting, and because they're not, we're now seeking out other opportunities or other means of getting those funds in order to create that gap in the shortfall.
So if equitable, means you're going to be getting less at Noble, because right now traditional schools are getting less than Noble, are you fine with that?
What do you mean that traditional schools are getting less than Noble?
I mean,
Explain
Noble, from what I've read, and I don't have the exact figures either, gets a lot of private money. So if we make an equitable system where they're going to be lowered because there's only so much money in the pie, and it's going to shrink to become equitable, because right now there's no equity. We don't, you know.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But here's my argument. If every child gets $1, and $1 is easy for anybody to work with. If everybody gets $1, if your 4th grader gets $1 and my 10th grader gets 75 cents, then there's a quarter missing. And all I'm asking for is for that quarter. Now, if you're getting $1.25 to my 75 cents because it's $1 and $1, then, you know, then if I'm getting a little bit more of your share, I'm just saying let them be equal. I'm saying let your child get the same amount of funding that my child was getting. And because I've chosen to take my child to a chartered school to get a quality education as my choice, and remember, charter schools are public schools. They're not private. They are public schools. And when you look at that, all I want is that my child has the same amount of funding as your 4th grader. And I don't think it should be any different.
Charter schools are public schools, but there's a difference that there's a lot less accountability with charter schools. They're operated by private organizations, you know, and there have been studies showing that they aren't, I mean, CPS is not a model of transparency, but it's really hard to figure out what charter operations are doing.
Well,
and then there's then there's the problem that they can just set a charter school wherever they find the real estate. There's no way to plan where, and we've had this problem in North Lawndale. We have the most underutilized schools and the most charter schools. So it's impossible to coordinate where our resources get deployed. And there's another complication, I think, and I'm sorry to throw a whole bunch of stuff, which is that charter schools, a lot of traditional schools have been waiting a long time for capital funding projects, and charter schools get a per pupil allocation if they have their own property of about, is it 400 per student for capital needs, and other charter schools have, CPS has closed neighborhood schools, spent millions of dollars on buildings and then leased them to charter schools for $1 a year. So that's another thing that needs to be taken into account.
Could I raise just one quick question here? I don't really understand the deep history of the charter movement. It's not that old. It hasn't been around for that long. But my sense of it, my understanding of it, was that the idea of a charter is that it's a kind of a, I don't know, it's like a research facility of some kind. It's like we're going to put a school in an urban area, and we're going to free it of a lot of the bureaucracy and the things that other schools have to deal with. And in return, we're going to get to study this charter. We're going to get to see if we can learn lessons from the way this school operates. And what seems to be happening around the country, certainly in New Orleans and places, is that the charter schools are becoming more and more the schools. They're not alternatives anymore. And what you seem to be saying is, hey, we want in all the way. We want to be no different than any other school. But because you're owned by a quasi-private organization, you are different, though, aren't you? I mean, I can't quite balance that.
Let let me take you back to where I sit. I'm a parent, and I sit with a couple of different hats. I have the responsibility of providing, or at least researching, the best education for my child. And right now, the charter schools give me a choice as to what I can look for. Now, you talked about the charter schools are, I think someone said over here that the charter schools are independently ran or in the corporate funded and all that. I'm gonna say that right now, charter schools are performing. And they're performing at a miraculous rate when it comes to students that are going to college, when you're looking at the testing scores and things like that. So
they perform at the same rate on tests.
Okay, can I just say this? I don't agree with that.
It's just a fact.
It's the Credo study.
Show me the fact then.
You have to read the Credo study. You can look it up. It shows that.
I've looked it up just like you have looked it up. I mean, and I can say for a fact that, you know what, I'll even take out all the charter schools. I'll say my choice. I live in West Englewood. Now, mind you, when I look at all the alternatives that my child had where I live, a charter school was the best choice for me. And when I look at those schools, if that option hadn't been there, I don't know what my options would have been. And so I have to look at, you know, you can say that, you know, all of the numbers are the same, but unfortunately in my neighborhood they're not. And so when you say you can drop a school here in an urban area and do some study, I can just say that right now the charter school that my child attends, not only is it performing for her, not only is it showing the passion for her, not only is she getting the discipline that she needs, but it's a holistic education that I would not have had that choice to make had that charter not existed. Now, everything else for me is, I don't want to say smoke and mirrors because that's not what I want to say, but it seems to me as if the argument can be on a variety of different levels, but we have to come down to, as a parent, I have to make the best choice for my child, and in my neighborhood, the charter option was the best choice. Now, mind you, in your neighborhood, maybe it's not the best choice. And maybe in yours it's not. However, in mine, it was.
And that's why no one would disagree with you on that, but that's why individual schools need to be looked at. There's tons of innovation at some of our traditional schools. There's, you know, charters, there's a marketing scheme going on that charters are superior. There are great schools that are, I'm sure, charter schools, and there are great traditional schools, and there's no substantive conversation about what is going on in our schools that works. And so the notion that they're better, maybe your school is better for your child, but you can't say that charters are superior when all
I never said charters were superior, and
I thought you just said that.
No, I said they were performing at a miraculous rate is what I said. Okay. I never said that they were superior, and I didn't say anything about the traditional public schools. I'm saying the choices that I had, the choices that were in my neighborhood, it worked for me. Now, mind you, when you say the traditional schools have been around for years. The traditional schools have been here. So if the traditional schools that's in your neighborhood is working for that neighborhood, then I mean, if a child, but I would hate for a child or a parent not to have that option or that choice for that traditional school that's performing well and a charter school that's performing well. Just give them the choice. And as a parent, that's what I want. When you sent your fourth grader to the school that you sent him to, you made that choice because that was the best school? Why did you make that choice?
But the choice.
Why did you make that choice?
Because I thought that was the best school for my son. But that was a choice that I had a well-resourced neighborhood traditional school. Charter schools are starting.
Well-resourced traditional charter school. What does a
neighborhood school?
I mean, what does that mean? A well-resourced.
Meaning well-resourced with a good curriculum, with a progressive, innovative curriculum, with. For me, that's actually what it means, well-resourced with teachers who are teaching my child to love learning. And that's not what I've gone to meetings for 3 years and asked, because I truly want an honest conversation about what works in the schools. And I get nothing. I'm looking for answers. What are the innovations? Because you mentioned this, that we can share. If charters are so great, what is it that they do that I'm working with parents in a school in West Englewood who are fighting to keep Goodloe School open because they like it for their children, and it's not underutilized. Someone says it is, and they're about to close it and put 300 more kids in there. But so for everybody, there's a school that works for them. So what is it that I actually truly have been asking, and all I've gotten for an answer is a longer day, which we now all have. So I'm wondering what this movement thinks can happen in the charter schools that can't happen in traditional schools. Because I see progressive, innovative work going on in my son's school, and I want to know why we're not all talking about this across the board.
Well, I think we are all talking about it. I think that we're talking, and our conversation with Charter Parents United, our conversation is just give us the equal funding. We have not said anything that would negate or make traditional public schools any less. We're not saying that. That's not what we're saying. We're just asking for the equal funding. I'm saying that as my tax dollars go in, I pay the same tax dollars that you do. And all I'm asking for is for my same equal funding. And you can say that you're getting the equal funding. Some may even say that we're getting more because of the outside funding that we're receiving. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We've had to go out and solicit these funds because of the shortfall.
But we do have celebrated situations like the one with UNO. You're not a part of UNO, but you know, UNO managed to get themselves $99 million out of the state legislature that went completely around the education system in Chicago. And we often see that charter schools are able to attract. Now, of course, I understand the other side of this argument, but charter schools are able to go out there and attract funding from major corporations that the city would never hope to be able to get for its schools. And as has been mentioned here, in many cases, the facilities are donated by the city. So now, again, I need to be corrected if I'm wrong about this. I've spent a fair amount of time trying to understand what the differences are, and the biggest difference, as far as I understand it, seems to be the physical plant money. That there is next to no physical plant money being given to the charter schools by CPS, but that seems to be taken care of by others. So I'm not sure that that's really quite the same thing. Go ahead.
Let me just be honest with you, Kim.
Yeah.
I am not quite for sure the amount of funding that is in that unequal part. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the source of that unequal part. So for me to give you a number, I couldn't.
Yeah, okay.
And,
right.
Or give me a resource, I couldn't. I mean, remember where I said I understand that you're in West Englewood helping the school out. But as a parent, I mean, that's what Charter Parents United are about. It's just asking for our same funding. Not to mention that we made a choice. It's just not about the funding. And that's what I think everybody needs to see.
That's right. It's not just about the funding.
And I need to get away from that. Mm-hmm. It's about the choice. Like you said, you chose to put your son, when he went to school, in a traditional public school in your neighborhood.
Right.
And I applaud that. My only concern is that if you didn't want to go there, what would be your other alternative?
So for these parents who are saying we want to keep our neighborhood schools open, do you think they ought to have that choice?
Oh, I don't. I mean, absolutely. I'm not saying. Oh, absolutely. If they want to keep those neighborhood schools, and if they're being maximized according to CPS's plan, I don't know that plan.
And there's a larger question too, which is, some people think it's pretty plausible that CPS is closing neighborhood schools and in order to open charter schools. Do you think that's a good way to go?
I don't know why you would have to ask CPS that. I mean, honestly, you would
I'm asking if you think if your organization has a position on that, or if you think that's a good way to go.
You know, I'm going to say that CPU position is, if there is an opportunity to put a chartered school in a neighborhood in order to give a parent a choice, in order to send them to a chartered public school or a traditional public school, then that's what our position is. The parents are just asking for a choice. That's all.
So when that happens, though, and this has happened in Lawndale and many places, when you put a charter school near a neighborhood school and it has a marketing budget and it draws students, and this school starts losing its per pupil funding, it draws resources away from that school. You don't see that as a problem?
I
mean, we have a limited amount of resources here, and that's
It doesn't
But
just.
all of them have a, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. It's not just a question of dollars. There's also the phenomenon that this school, which is perceived as being a better school, then draws the. We also be delicate how we say this, but I like to say it draws the students who have the more engaged parents, because they're more concerned about their kids. So those kids are then drawn into the charter school. And what we have is the traditional school left with more and more of the isolated kids, the kids who are really tough cases that, may I say, probably are not as desirable to the charter school. So the relationship between the two systems is not benign. There is definitely a kind of almost it's too strong a word to use, but there's almost a kind of a predatory effect that we're seeing here, that the charters are causing the further deterioration of the numbers of the kids who are in, and I'll say it, the quality of the kids who are in the traditional schools. That's not your problem. I understand
You're
that.
right.
I totally understand that. And I think I completely see your view here that hey, I'm looking for the best thing for my kid, and I've got what I've got. But to those of us who try to stand back and look at the whole picture, it almost seems that there's a kind of an unfair advantage to the charters.
Well, I have to say this. I have friends that have children that are in the traditional public schools. And they're outgoing parents, just like myself. They're very engaged parents, just like myself. And they chose to send their child where they chose to send their child to. Now, mind you, if we're creating this, I want to say the more attention-seeking children versus the more attention-getting children, if we want to kind of separate those two out, I say that, if it's not as if we're in competition. And that's kind of the way it feels right now. I'll be honest with you. Like you said, if you have one school here and you want to have one school here, you have a marketing plan that's really attracting. You have the more engaged parents that are, you think about all of these components. But it takes a lot to raise a child, including a good education, including a good home, including good parents, including all of these things. It takes a lot of components in order to raise a child. And I say that right now, I would hate to see that schools are competing for good education. However, that's kind of the way it feels right now, that if you put one school in with another school and you have a marketing plan out, it's like as if they're in competition. And I don't think that's necessarily what we're going for. That's not what we're looking for.
Well, but in Lawndale, you have all these charter schools and all these underutilized neighborhood schools. It's not a coincidence.
There's also the issue of access. When you have things like fines, when you impose fines on kids, that automatically keeps some people out from being able to go because they don't have the money to pay fines. For some reason.
Fines for what?
Discipline.
For what? Give me an example.
A teacher at Noble tells me there are fines and detentions for not buttoning buttons, not tying shoes.
Right.
Some parents just cannot go to a school. They don't have, these are tough times. So that is a barrier to access. And every parent should pick the best school. It's not an issue here of individual choice. It's why is the system pushing charters when there are barriers to access and saying that charters are superior? Let's have an honest conversation. I asked you, what is it about the charter? And I still can't get an answer. What is, but let me finish. There's also the special ed issue. When I look at all of the elementary charter schools, only 2 have special ed rates at the district average. So we have all of our kids in special ed and who perhaps can't afford the fines of charters in neighborhood schools. And so we have a system it's not apples to apples, as my friend Jeannie Marie Olson has pointed out through a mass amount of data. So it's fine, of course you're going to exercise individual choice, but why does the system get to push something that's not giving us, it's not choice. the choices are not equal. It's creating a separate system in a way.
I'm going to have to call time here because we are literally at the last 5 minutes of our show, and I do want to make sure we spend some time talking about the very important issue of the schools closing, which is coming to the board on the 22nd. It's literally days away. Your organization, Wendy, has done some very good work of going to the schools that are proposed to be closed and kind of documenting the cases, in many cases, for why these schools really can't be justified as being closed. I just want you to talk to me a little bit about that just for the couple of minutes we have left, because I think we owe you for the good work that you've done to talk about that.
Well, it really, I mentioned Jeannie Marie. She did the research on the apples to apples, and she discovered that the space utilization standards that CPS was using allowed for 36 kids in a classroom. So these inflated numbers we were getting on underutilization were based on allowing for 36 kids in a room. That got us very nervous, so I decided I need to visit a lot of these schools to see what they look like in reality. And so we managed to get into 22 schools and find that the reality of the building does not often reflect what CPS's spreadsheet tells us about space use. They don't take into account special ed populations. They've got schools on that list with over 30% special ed, where kids are in a room with maybe 8 to 15 kids. So they use a blunt instrument, as they've said, to calculate utilization. So we have many schools on the list currently that don't have a single empty room, that are slated to take 200 to 450 more children, and no one has a clue where they're going to go in the building. We're going to have mass overcrowding and crazy safety issues. I've been walking around West Pullman and West Englewood talking to residents, and parents are telling me they cannot cross some of these streets. So I don't understand how some of these consolidations are being proposed with anyone who has any foot on the ground of reality of what's happening.
And there also, of course, is the whole issue of the cost. Something that occurs to me that you all have in common is that you're befuddled by the Board of Education's lack of transparency in so many of these issues, no matter where you stand. But one of the really weird issues is this thing, Curtis, about the need for suddenly to borrow $300 million in order to close these schools.
Yeah, and then it turns out that they made a calculation error, and the capital savings are going to be $100 million or so.
Right. There's been some great documentation of that.
And just yesterday, Mayor Emanuel was saying we need to close schools because of the budget deficit. It's going to have no impact on the budget deficit. A year from now, we'll be talking about we'll be in the same shape.
The $25 million just for 30 years just to retire the debt for being able to close the schools.
Yes.
And I think, well, you're right. Folks, I end the program deeply frustrated because we found out here.
4 of us.
Yeah, it makes 4 of us. Because we found out here what we all knew from the beginning, that these things are so complicated that we can't solve them. I thought we would just bring a couple of reasonable people to the table. 30 minutes, we'll have it all done. You know, Barbara, you've got a tough job if you're watching. Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you, Curtis, for being here today. I'm Ken Davis. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. You can watch us anytime at all at this address right under here that you see on the screen, and we'll be back next week. Charlie Meyerson sitting in this, a week from now. Anyway, never mind. See you soon right here on Chicago Newsroom. Bye.